Here I am back again, and I am going to read you the first chapter of Prince Alice, the Duchess of Gloucester. If you want to read a little synopsis about her, I pulled up a little Wikipedia page just to get a little synopsis about her. She lived to be 102 years old, and she is the mother of the current Duke of Gloucester, which is Prince Richard. He's 80 years old now, and his brother was William, the Duke of Gloucester, and he died an early death in an airplane accident. But his father was Henry, the Duke of Gloucester, and he was the third son of King George V and Queen Mary. And when King Edward VIII abdicated, you'll see how Prince Henry had to step up as the next older brother to help and support King George VI. But this here, I'm just going to read to you the very first chapter because it is very interesting life. And these Gloucesters and the Kents, they have value when it comes to the monarchy, as does Princess Anne, and her current husband. And the same is true for Edward and Sophie. They have such value when it comes to supporting current monarchs. And it'll be interesting to see when the Duke of Kent and the Duke of Gloucester die, what will happen to their hereditary heirs and how they've had a long enough life that they've had careers. So I do wonder if they will take on their hereditary role and support the family as the next Duke of Kent and the next Duke of Gloucester. But anyways, this is a good book and a good read. And it's a book that actually is very, very hard to find. I had to wait a long time on thriftsbook.com. I had to wait a long time just to find a book on her. And she's got some other books, but at this point, 1980s is called an older vintage type book. So, can it be really 80 years since I made my first appearance into this world on Christmas Day, 1901, at Montague House, Whitehall, London? Apart from my three sisters and an aged cousin of 95, I doubt if there is anyone now alive who can remember the place. It stood more or less opposite the gateway into Horse Guards Parade and was demolished in favor of the government offices well over half century ago. Recently, as Air Chief Commandant of the WAAF, I had cause to be in these new premises and somewhat startled a gathering of air women when I announced that I had been born just below where we were all sitting. This was absolutely true, for I had well remembered my mother's corner bedroom overlooking the river and being told that it was there that I was born. She must have found the timing of my arrival singularly inconvenient, not least because the family traditionally assembled at Dalkeith for Christmas. My childhood memories are dominated by houses because every year, on a fixed rota, we used to visit different ones at different seasons. We lived in Montague House from June until July. The site was Crown property. One of the Dukes of Montague first built a mansion there to save him the journey to his principal residence in Bloomsbury when he was kept late at the House of Lords. To travel a mile through London in those days was considered far too dangerous after dark. My great-grandfather commissioned the building that replaced it, which was completed in 1864. It was a large house with a big garden at the back extending to the embankment, a gravel sweep at the front with a porter's lodge at the main gate, and a row of high trees hiding the traffic as it passed along Whitehall. There were no attics or basements. The top 2 floors were devoted to the bedrooms. the first floor of the sitting room and reception room, and the grounds floor to the kitchen and the servants' quarters. The main reception rooms all all gave on to a wide stone terrace with the steps at either end descending to the garden. Beyond the garden, you can see Thames. My memories are of a large house, which of course it was. There must have been a great number of bedrooms, for during the summer season, not only my parents and eventually 8 of us children stayed there, but also my aunt, Katie Hampton, my father's eldest sister, and her husband and children. There were also, of course, my grandparents and my Aunt Connie, their second youngest child, who, before her marriage to Douglas Cairns, acted as a general factotum to her parents. The grown ups each had a maid or a valet. 2 nurses, a nursery maid, and a governess supervised me and my brothers and sisters. All told, there were 68 people permanently resident during the season, and as far as I know, only one bathroom in the whole building. Oh my goodness. Can you imagine that? One bathroom for all those people in that big house. I cannot remember who was allowed to use it. Our nurseries and schoolroom were on the second floor, alongside the other main bedrooms and dressing rooms. The Brand cousins had their nurseries on the top floor with a wonderful view over the embankment and the river. One could hear the trams rattling past and the boomings and the hoots of the ships traveling up and down the Thames. My grandparents presided, and I can remember them during the Montague House summers in some ways better than I can my parents. This is not altogether surprising. My father was an MP and rarely got home before our bedtime, and my mother hated the season. She was shy, a retiring person who never came to the nursery and always seemed to be busy in her own little sitting room. Occasionally, we would be allowed in, but I disliked it because one always had to be quiet and do a jigsaw puzzle or something else equally boring. On the whole, as young children, we seldom saw our parents. My grandmother, in contrast, could not possibly have been more sociable. She entertained enormously, with masses of friends and relations pouring in and out for lunch parties and dinner parties. There was a custom apparently established by my great grandparents that anyone who knew the family could turn up for lunch without invitation. My Aunt Connie, in a private memoir she wrote, says that this custom was very popular with the denizens of Whitehall, from prime ministers downwards, and that up to the 20 extra guests were daily catered for. I recall only 2 extra places being laid in that way. Perhaps entertainment was already becoming less lavish. It was a nice custom, especially for people who were not well off and had not got to cook for themselves. The 2 empty chairs were invariably always filled. At one such lunch, pre-war lunch, I remembered that for the first time in my life I saw a woman, the morganic wife of Grand Duke Michael of Prussia. I saw her smoke a cigarette. She fitted the cigarette into the end of a long holder and then, to our amazement, had it lit. Nor was that all. My mother, who was presiding, had ordered mince, which she was keen on for some reason. When the dish was offered to the Grand Duke, he said very haughtily, "Oh, no, thank you. I prefer to chew my own meat." There were always huge lunch parties. The scroll room table was set apart from the rest. There we sat with a governess and had to wait our turn till the grown-ups had been served, which took ages. If there were treats like strawberries and cream, we would suffer agonies in case they were finished before reaching us. The butlers and footmen always tried to make sure there was something left over for us. We had great fun with them, though the only place in the servants' quarters which we were regularly allowed to visit was the still room to make cakes. One memorable evening we were woken up at 10 o'clock to watch my grandparents going off to some court function in the Booklook state coach. My grandmother was the mistress of the robes to Queen Alexandra. The coach was ornate and magnificent, and only used for important occasions like court balls or the opening of Parliament. The harness was a shining silver, and there were wigged coachmen and footmen in the front, and two postilions, all in livery, with red breeches and white stockings. The family coat of arms, picked out in the fairy lights, had been mounted for the occasions over the front door. I distinctly remember this being lit electrically, though I do not think there was electric lighting in the house that day. The coach subsequently went to a museum in Maidstone, but today had been seen at Boughton in Hamptonshire, a Booklook residence in England. My nephew Johnny, the present Duke, had been trying to find some stuffed horses for it so that the public can see the magnificent uniforms and harnesses as they were intended to be seen. But so far he has met with no success. Each morning at Montague House, we used to visit our grandparents. My grandmother would be in her loyal, lovely sitting room with its blue satin chairs. She always looked very grand. My grandfather usually gave us a half-crown or a sweet. We just went in and said good morning. Before our morning walks, and then we would scamper down the huge, slippery white marble staircase into the hall. The hall was paved with white marble with inlaid black corners, and we used to enjoy jumping from one of these black islands to the next. Footmen wearing livery sat on the two mahogany benches ready to open the door or answer bells. The prams were hidden somewhere to one side, and the footmen used to help our nurses down the steps with them. A troop of little Scots would then cross Whitehall and go into St. James Park to feed bread to the ducks, making faces on the way at the mounted sentries guarding the entrance to the Horse Guards parade. I and my four sisters were invariably dressed alike in spite of the 14 years difference between the eldest and youngest. On wet days we were put into little red mackintoshes, which caused great amusement as we marched past the soldiers, because when it was raining they wore the same. Our prams, like the various household coaches, were decorated with the family crest and painted in Booklook colors. Dark green with a pale green line. The Fitzwilliam family, who lived next door in Richmond Terrace, alas no more, had bright yellow prams and coaches, which we thought much smarter and envied greatly. Mr. Shutter was an old lodge-keeper, an impeccably dressed old gentleman in a top hat. He would open the main gates in answer to a push bell, but a side gate for people entering on foot could be opened automatically by treading on little pedals outside. It was always a great game to tread on the pedal and to hide out of sight before Mr. Shutter could spot us. A phenomenon shortly explained, no doubt, by the arrival of a breathless nanny or a governess in hot pursuit. Mr. Shutter was a true friend, always playing with gusto his part as a man baffled by inexplicable mystery. Occasionally we would be taken for a drive with our mothers to drop visiting cards. It was the custom to thank one's host and hostess for the day after a party by dropping cards. Usually the coachman and footman would be dispatched to do this, but occasionally, probably because she had nothing better to do, my mother, taking some of us, went along also. There was a very precise etiquette involved. One large card and two little ones had to be left, twisted over. The large one had the Countess of Dalkeith engraved on it, the smaller one, the Earl of Dalkeith. Two earls had to go with one countess for some reason. No message was written on the cards. The footman would jump off and, on entering the particular house, would leave the cards on the tray provided in the hall. Meanwhile, we would sit waiting in the carriage. Other times, after tea, my mother would take us in the landau to Hyde Park. A landau was an open carriage with a good hood that would go up if it rained. We would stop near Hyde Park Corner and go and sit on the little green metal chairs that were set under the trees. One hired the use of these uncomfortable seats by buying a ticket for tuppence for a ticket collector. Each day had a different color, so that people would not cheat by using the same ticket twice. Various boring old gentlemen in top hats and tailcoats would then perch themselves alongside my mother and make polite conversation. We anticipated the whole procedure with a certain amount of dread. One evening, as we plopped along in the shadow of the fat coachman, the thin footman, this ritual was transformed by the sudden appearance of a fire engine with bells ringing, pulled by 6 black horses at full gallop, or fat horses enthused by the unexpected competition, tried their best to follow and were only checked with difficulty. It was rather an alarming moment. Our greatest enjoyment was the garden. On one side of the lawn was a beautiful old Chinese pagoda, now at Boughton, in which my grandparents used to take tea, weather permitting. Otherwise, we seemed to have the whole place to ourselves. There were a few large plane trees, a catapulta tree, bushes, and bordering flower beds. The flowers were for the most part red geraniums and marguerites encircled by close-planted clumps of those little royal blue plants one always sees in public gardens. All other London gardens that we visited looked exactly the same. At the far end there was a thick line of shrubs, a narrow path, and then, bordering the embankment, a 7-foot wall with a wide top. We children thought to be safely out of mischief in the garden, would pile chairs up against it, clamber up to watch the passing traffic on the street and the ships beyond, so much more numerous in those days. We dangled wobbly wire spiders on long bits of elastic in the path of pedestrians below, skillfully whisking them up and ducking out of sight before our victims could spot us. There were always a number of pavement artists sitting opposite who could not have provided a more appreciative audience for our escapades. Afterwards, we carefully put back the chairs exactly where we found them. The garden had other attractions. Near the wall, we each had a little allotment to tend. To get into the gardens, we had to go along a narrow passage past the housekeeper's room. This was always a treat, because she would let us choose something from her store of chocolates and sugar fruits as we passed. On Sundays, we were taken to church in the private chapel at Marlborough House. Queen Alexandra was usually there. She gave a children's party every year, and at one of them, a lot of pygmies danced about naked, which we thought was very funny. For weeks, my sister Sybil and I used to get into trouble for jumping about without any clothes when we were meant to have been tucked up at night. On the whole, we did not do much visiting or party going. Our numbers, Scots and Brands, combined, made us self-sufficient and never at a loss for amusement. A memorable pastime was to send semaphore flag signals from the schoolroom balcony to the policeman across the way in Scotland Yard. They jovially signaled answers to our messages. Government offices were already predominant in the district, and Montague House was taken over as an adjunct to the War Office during the war. My parents made do with a flat, and towards the end of the war bought 2 Grosvenor Place. By then, the world too had changed out of all recognition. And that's the end of that chapter. And you'll see how her life is when she was young and how it was such a different time. She mentions Queen Alexandra. She was born in 1901 on Christmas Day, and she lived until the 29th of October in 2004. That's 102 years. That's a really long time. She lived longer than Queen Elizabeth, than Prince Philip, than any of the monarchs. So, anyways, that's the end of this chapter, and we will read another chapter in another episode.